I too want to, on behalf of Solidarity People Before Profit, welcome the Sinn Féin motion and give it our full support. What I do want to ask the Minister is to why he thinks, given the experience that he had in opposition, why he thinks he needed to amend it so deeply and so hugely, when I think had he been sitting on the opposite benches, he probably would have agreed with every word of it. Instead of amending it in the way that he has done. So maybe you could address that when you return to speak to us. I think the motion is important for reasons, all the reasons other deputies have said, and I won't repeat them. But there's another reason why I think these kind of approaches that we need at this point in the COVID crisis are absolutely vital. And it is because we are facing into a period where there's a tug-of-war taken place between the absolute needs of protecting our public health and the needs to return to economic activity. And it's extraordinary that we've seen probably more emphasis put on the reopening of the pubs, and I'm not opposed to the reopening of the pubs per se, but we've seen more emphasis put on that than we have of the reopening of our health services to the degree that we need them reopened. And this is why I think this motion is important, because there's a vacuum out there in our society at the moment, and it's a vacuum that represents the frustration of tens of thousands of people who are anxious about the continued downlock of COVID and the restrictions of COVID, but who are also vulnerable to the anti-science logic that is being put about by many groups, organised groups throughout Irish society, anti-science logic that says that the government are over-egging the pudding, there's no danger, people are not dying from this disease, we shouldn't mask up, we shouldn't socially distance. There's also campaigns in the schools where legalised letters are being sent to principals and teachers warning them not to take their children out of a class if they have a temperature. These are really dangerous times for ordinary people whose ideas and whose frustration and whose values may be vulnerable to this kind of exploitation, and it is thoroughly and absolutely anti-science. Not only is it anti-science, but it's anti-worker, and specifically it's anti-health worker. Not to mask up, not to take the precautions in public health are very, very dangerous. And so I think this motion, although it doesn't necessarily address that, helps to shift the emphasis of the political class onto where it should be. How are we going to address the balance and the tension between our economic survival and our health services? And I think that this goes a long way towards pulling towards the latter, which is absolutely needed. Because it is vital that we protect ourselves, and particularly to protect our health workers, but it is also vital that we signal to the population that they are not going to be neglected in terms of the need of their mammogram. I'm of an age where I know loads of women whose mammograms have been cancelled and who are worried sick that this may, in the long run, endanger their lives, because cancer, has been said over and over here tonight, can be life-threatening, can be life-taking. And the same would be true of cervical check, bowel screening, etc. So the thrust of this is to insist that we begin to find ways to return to full, normal, proper services in terms of screening. It's dangerous, particularly for women, where a lot of these screening services have been denied them, but we've also seen a period where women have been put through massive danger because of our approach to healthcare, and that is the approach of outsourcing some of the best services that we could have given them, like cervical check, like other types of screening. And that outsourcing has led to the tragedies that we've seen with the 221 women, with the names who are now household familiar names and the faces that we all know on our screens, who've had the tragedy of being victims of a service that let them down. And to that end, I just want to spend a couple of minutes talking about the cervical check scandal, because it isn't over. And it was alluded to earlier on here that the legislation has to be put in place to be able to deal with it. And next Tuesday, women who belong to the 221 group will be outside the gates of this House to protest about this. And I hope that you, Minister, and Minister Donnelly, who's left, will go out to meet them, because you've been out in the past as opposition deputies meeting women who protest in this manner. I personally know a very tragic case where the family are still being brought through the courts. That has to end. That has to end. The Irish state cannot be treating women in this way. And have we not learned, and as has been said, do we not think that the legacy of Ruth Morrissey matters? Do we not urgently see the necessity to undo the harm that was done on the case of cervical screening? And I think also we need a faster turnaround of the services once they're reinstated, which implies we need more investment. We also need more trained up staff, and ultimately we need the clinicians and the technicians trained up here in our very fine colleges, young men and women who can do the job here at home. We should never ever again rely on sending our services out of this country. So full repatriation of all screening services is required. And finally, Minister, I just want to say that the kind of protests that we are seeing in our streets of people insisting we're not wearing masks, we're not socially distanced, this is not acceptable because it is anti-worker. And this Saturday I will be on the streets with a smaller group of socially distant, fully masked up protesters saying that very thing. To be anti-mask is to be anti-health worker, and we have to put an end to that sort of rhetoric, which is why the positive nature of this motion and full support to Sinn Féin for putting it is really important in the midst of this pandemic.